Can a simple failure on a screen change a whole weekend of Formula One? And even more, can Lewis Hamilton cost a podium in Monaco? What happened in the classification of this GP could rewrite the rules of the game. In Formula One, there are circuits where precision is a constant demand, and then Monaco, a path that does not allow errors, where the margin between success and disaster is measured in centimeters. No matter how legendary, how many world titles you have won, or how many clues you have dominated, in Monaco, a single moment can define your entire weekend. That was exactly what Lewis Hamilton lived during the Q1 of the 2025 Grand Prix. Everything happened at the entrance to the Massenet curve, one of the most technical points of the urban circuit of the Principality. Hamilton came from completing a launched return and, as usual in the initial classification phases, reduced the rhythm to prepare his next attempt. But just behind him, Max Verstappen began his quick lap with a devilish rhythm, trying to find that necessary margin to move on to the next round in a more tight Q1 than expected. This is where the situation, apparently ordinary, became a sequence of errors with great repercussions. The Ferrari team, at that time under the command of communications with Hamilton, acted as the main channel of critical information that should guide the pilot's decisions. Initially, they fulfilled their role. They correctly reported that Verstappen came in a fast lap. Hamilton, at that time, was preparing to stay out of the ideal trace, not to hinder. However, in seconds, a second message arrived. A contradictory. The team told him that Verstappen was braking or in a slow return. That simple detail, misunderstood and worse statement, was enough to completely change Hamilton's behavior on the track. By trusting that new indication, Hamilton decided to return to the main race line just in the Massenet curve, the same moment as Verstappen reached it at high speed. The result was a critical situation of impeding, a direct obstruction to another pilot during his launched return that forced the Dutch to modify his emergency trace to avoid contact. Verstappen, evidently frustrated, aborted his attempt and launched a burst of complaints that reflected not only their anger, but the tension inherent in such errors. The FIA, observing telemetry and the onboard cameras, soon broadcast its verdict. Hamilton was penalized with 3 positions on the grille due to unjustified obstruction. But the interesting thing here is not only the penalty itself, but the root of the problem. It was not a malicious maneuver or a clumsiness of the pilot. It was a direct product of desynchronization between what the team sees, what it says, and how the pilot interprets that information in real time. In a circuit like Monaco, where traffic is chaotic, barriers are centimeters, and the latter cannot be wasted, the margin of error becomes virtually null. And in this context, the error was not only tactical, it was symbolic. It reflects a structural failure in the way in which the teams operate communication in critical moments. If Ferrari, with all its resources, could send contradictory signals to one of the most experienced pilots in history, what guarantees that this cannot be repeated in other circumstances, with less tan pilots on equally demanding clues? The Massenet curve was recorded not only as a circuit tension zone, but as the epicenter of a controversy that will probably be analyzed throughout the season. And although Hamilton's punishment seems just from the regulation, he also invites a much deeper reflection. To what extent are the responsible pilots when the decision is born of incorrect information that they have no way to verify in real time? This incident marked a before and after in the strategic approach of the weekend for Ferrari. And in a championship where each position counts, a second error can cost points, reputation, and even the complete narrative of a pilot who seeks to reinvent himself in a new team. In contemporary Formula One, where each movement of a pilot is connected to a real-time data network, the role of technology is not only assistance, it is co-decision. Decisions are not made only from cockpit, but together with an operational structure that depends on precise, reliable, and synchronized information. But what happens when that data flow, in which everyone trusts blindly? That is exactly what happened in the case of Lewis Hamilton during the classification of the 2025 Monaco Grand Prix. Beyond the communication error between team and pilot, there is an even deeper root. A failure in the information system that serves as the basis for critical decisions on the track. Hamilton, when asked after the incident, was clear in his explanation. He did not evade responsibility, but revealed a detail that completely changed the perception of the problem. In his own words, there was a problem with the computer screen. That screen, located in its steering wheel and also monitored from the box's wall, initially showed that Verstappen was coming in a fast lap. Then, abruptly, that information disappeared and was replaced by erroneous data that indicated that Verstappen was in a slow or cooling lap. This type of screen is not a simple monitor. It is a vital node within the decision network that allows a pilot to know what happens around him, something especially critical in a circuit like Monaco, where visibility is limited and the space for minimal maneuvers. The information that is displayed there includes telemetry data of other cars, relative positions, time delta, and critical alerts about traffic. If that system is corrupted, it becomes a silent trap. What this failure exposes is a key vulnerability in the modern architecture of Formula One. Reminds us that, despite the brightness of cutting-edge technology, we continue to depend on electronic circuits, lines of code, and digital signals that, however sophisticated, are not exempt from error. And in a discipline where a poorly informed decision can cost not only a grille position, but the possibility of adding points or even a championship, this type of errors cannot be overlooked. Moreover, this incident reopens a debate that the category has been postponing for a long time. Where does the pilot's responsibility begin and ends when his decisions are conditioned by a technical system on which he has no direct control? Hamilton's mistake was caused, yes, but he was induced by a tool that was supposed to guide him, not to confuse him. And this questioned the logic with which the FIA evaluates the sanctions in these cases. If a pilot acts according to the data that his team and his technology provide, should he load with the whole consequence? This reflection also leads to ask about the ethical and technical limits of technological dependence in sport. In an era where simulators, predictive analyses, and automated strategies dominate the boxes, is it sustainable to continue treating technical errors as if they were purely human? Formula One is a pilot sport, but also of engineers, programmers, digital strategists. And when a piece of that gear fails, the result can be as devastating as a bad braking. In this case, Hamilton's sanction was the most visible consequence. But the real cause was in the invisible, in the bits that traveled badly, in the signal that was interpreted wrong, in a system that, like all technology, has its Achilles heel. This incident is a call for the entire category. If the information validation protocols do not adjust, if the active role of technology in each maneuver is not recognized, we will continue to see more cases where the real error is not in the pilot's hands, but in the machine that should help him. The Monaco Grand Prix is not just a race, it is a showcase. A showcase where each error is amplified and each success is celebrated as if it were a title. In that maximum pressure environment, the sanction to Lewis Hamilton was not simply a matter of regulation. It was a direct blow to the narrative that surrounded its arrival in Ferrari. It was the opportunity to demonstrate, in one of the most prestigious scenarios of the calendar, that the union between the 7-time world champion and the most legendary team in history was not only a symbolic alliance, but also competitive. But the general context of the classification and the reactions that were unleashed revealed that what happened in Massenet was much more than a simple incident. At the moment after the incident, the cameras immediately focused the face of Max Verstappen. The Dutch, known for his aggressiveness and brutal honesty, soon reacting on radio. His words, direct and loaded with frustration, made it clear that for him, it had been a massive impeding, a flagrant obstruction that ruined a key attempt in a circuit where opportunities are scarce. Verstappen, nothing was kept. His tone and body language reflected more than discomfort. They reflected the certainty that this aborted return could cost him much more than a simple position on the grille. In Monaco, where to advance is almost a miracle, exiting some positions further can equal to losing any possibility of victory. On the other hand, from Ferrari's box, the tension was palpable. The cameras also captured the gestures of frustration of the engineers. They knew that the error was born from the wall, not from the track. And that in Ferrari has a special weight. The team has historically criticized strategic errors and controversial decisions. In this case, an internal communication failure revived all those ghosts. And Hamilton, although he tried to maintain his composure, did not hide his disappointment. His subsequent communication with the team was more than a complaint, it was an alert signal. The British knew that the problem was not a bad calculation of his, but a systemic failure that had left it exposed. In the paddock, the reactions did not wait. Analysts, expiles, and team leaders agreed that the incident opened a new chapter in the discussion about how these situations should be judged. Some defended the sanction as a strict application of the regulation. If a pilot prevents another, it must be penalized regardless of the cause. Others, on the other hand, requested greater flexibility, arguing that the technical context should be considered. That when a pilot acts based on erroneous information provided by his team, the sanction cannot be automatic. The most relevant, however, is how this episode impacts the competitive narrative of the season. In a year where Ferrari seemed to be resurfaced strongly, and where Hamilton seeks to meet the victory, each point counts, each session matters. The penalty not only relegated the British on the grille, but also altered all the dynamics of his weekend. Instead of attacking since the second row, He was forced to fight from further back, losing the possibility of capitalizing on a classification that, without that error, would have been one of his best performances of the year. These types of situations also influence the pilot's emotional state. Hamilton arrived in Ferrari with the pressure not only to be competitive, but to return the glory to Maranello. And although he has shown flashes of his capacity, these setbacks can erode trust if they are repeated. At the same time, Verstappen, accustomed to operating with surgical precision, perceives any interference as a direct threat to its domain. That is why his reaction was so intense. In his mentality, there is no room for stumbling blocks that are not self-responsibility. The sanction imposed on Lewis Hamilton in Monaco 2025, derived from a technical and communicational failure, raises a concern that goes beyond the outcome of a single classification. We are not simply before a specific error, but in the face of a symptom of something deeper. A system that has technologically evolved to the point of critically depending on elements that, although invisible to the spectator, are as decisive as the pilot's talent or the design of the car. Is this incident an isolated fact, or represents the first warning of a structural problem that Formula One has not yet learned to manage? What happened in Monaco should not be analyzed only as a technical anecdote or one more sanction in the long history of the championship. The incident exposes a conceptual vacuum in current regulations, the lack of specific criteria to distinguish between human errors and failures induced by technological problems. At present, if one car blocks another during a launched return, the responsibility falls exclusively on the obstructive pilot. But what happens when that maneuver is born of wrong information provided by a tool that, by definition, should be infallible? Formula One has reached a sophistication level where pilots are not only athletes but real-time data managers. On each lap, they receive an avalanche of information from the team, from their screens, from the car sensors. And that information is processed under extreme pressure, in second fractions, without the possibility of verification or rethinking. When one of those signs fails, as in the case of Hamilton, the pilot's ability to react correctly is cancelled. What was previously intuition and reflection now depends on a complex digital input chain. And if one of those links is broken, the consequence cannot only fall on who is behind the wheel. This is where the category needs to rethink not only its regulations, but its operational philosophy. Because this is not an exclusive problem of Ferrari or Hamilton. It is a latent threat to all teams. A bad calculation, an error in telemetry, an erroneous interpretation of the traffic radar, a screen that is not updated on time. Any of these factors can lead to similar incidents in any circuit. And if the regulation continues to apply sanctions with a strictly binary logic, guilty or not guilty, there is a risk of eroding trust between the pilots and their teams, and of generating a culture of fear of error, instead of promoting a more robust technical collaboration.